Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, X. I thought you might find my experience interesting. I haven't pre-typed any of this because I hadn't planned on sharing it today. But it will probably be a little long. With that, let me cut to the chase. Once upon a time, I did some work in South America, which resulted in a harrowing personal experience. There's some cool Andean folklore that ties into this story, which I hope you enjoy. Picture a small mountain village in Peru. I don't want to name it for professional reasons. I'm doing some research there. It's my first time in this part of the world. I'm young and naive, knowledgeable about local politics. But at the time I don't realize how deeply the village is split along religious lines. Local religious leaders from various factions are competing, attempting to assert control over village politics. Lots of backstabbing and behind-the-scenes shenanigans. They put up a nice facade of politeness though, and I mistake this facade for a willingness to work with me. Big mistake. They end up using me. I have access to plenty of outside resources provided through my university. Religious leaders ask me for things, which they then promise to their people. I become embroiled in a fierce power struggle. Different religious leaders think I'm aligned with their particular sect. I'm not. I'm just an academic. I attempt to put an end to their taking advantage of me. This comes across as betrayal. Now they all think I'm conspiring against them. Every leader, from every sect, and their followers to become suspicious and resentful of me. Not good in my line of work. By the time I leave, it's apparent that my assignment is total failure. Needless to say, I was not in a hurry to go back. The whole thing was a sort of blemish on my reputation. But then, several years later, I come across a news item. Some trouble in a small region of South America. I see my village named, among others. Apparently some sort of witch hunt has recently swept through the area. Literally a witch hunt. People were accused of being pishtacos. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. For now, just know that it's like a South American vampire and people really do believe in it. A hysteria ensued. A few of the accused pishtacos were brutally murdered. A few others that were thought to be in league with the pishtacos were also tortured and beaten to death. Basically, anyone accused of being a pishtako ends up horribly maimed and murdered. Military gets called in to quell the hysteria. Some of the murderers are arrested. Others disappear without a trace. The bodies of a few of the dead pishtacos are recovered. And that's that. All very disturbing. Anyway, fast forward a few weeks. An old colleague invites me down to Peru to help him with a few things. I never get to travel anymore, so I agree. Decide it's time to revisit my old village, too. Alright, here's where the X material sort of begins. Let me skip over the irrelevant stuff. Just know that my colleague and I arrived several days earlier than we needed to, and I let him know that I would be visiting my old village alone. I arrive at the village. It's been a long time since I've been here, so I'm hoping nobody recognizes me. But immediately, I run into several people who remember me. They're very friendly, which strikes me as a little odd, but I begin to ask them, one by one, about what I read in the papers. They seem either not to know what I'm talking about or they're all playing dumb. Eventually, I run into an old religious leader named Diego. He's a traditionalist sort of guy, which means he isn't politically powerful. But he's a big deal to the villagers. Has lots of social connections, knows everybody's business, etc. As soon as I see him, he hurries over, asks how long I've been in town. I tell him I got in today. I mention that I've already run into a few people. He seems very concerned and begins to tell me about their problem with El Pishtaco. According to Diego, there was a recent death in the village. A young girl died in a highly unusual manner. This girl went off by herself one day without telling anyone where she was going. Wasn't seen for most of the day. By evening, she still wasn't back. Her parents were worried sick, and a few of their relatives and some other villagers gathered at their house, preparing to go out and search for her. But then, the girl came home. Physically, she seemed fine. No scars or bruises or anything. People had assumed she'd been kidnapped. The only obviously weird thing is how disoriented the girl seems. She can't even speak very well. After a while, people give up on interrogating her and decide it's best to let her rest. But the next morning the parents find their daughter looking different. The previous night she seemed off but looked normal. Now she looks unusually frail and thin, like she hasn't eaten in weeks. She can't even get out of bed. Parents are worried that she's suffering from susto, a spiritual ailment where the individual is frightened by something then wastes away. But the girl tells them no. She still has trouble speaking, but she slowly tells them that the day before she'd gone out to pick fruits, she traveled outside of the village where someone attacked her. Her parents asked her who.
El Pishtaco.
This news disturbs them deeply. An encounter with a pishtako is certain death. So the parents call for Diego. By the time he arrives, the girl is already dead. According to her parents, the girl suddenly stood up out of bed, even though she had been too weak to do so before, and moved very quickly towards the forest. They chased after her, but she was moving fast when suddenly she made a sound and collapsed. When her parents reached her, they found that she had no pulse. Diego arrived not long after. Her body looked totally dried up, like someone had sucked her blood out with a straw. Diego seems very upset while telling all of this, and he reveals that he had actually been present when the young girl returned to her parents' house. He had been the one who recommended they all leave her alone and let her rest. He and everyone else went home, and later Diego received word to return to the house, which is when he found the girl dead. He said many of the villagers blamed him. They thought he should have known the girl had been attacked by a pishtako. They said he had failed her. He then reveals that many of the villagers are still angry with me. Every single religious faction had felt that I had betrayed them. None of the factions got along, but for a while they seemed almost unified by their hatred of me. Diego tells me I messed up by coming back, and that I made things worse by trying to discuss the news stories I read.
They're going to think you're the pishtako that killed that young girl. You need to leave the village.
He says he'll help me. He'll hire a truck that can get me out of town. Keep in mind, I don't fully trust Diego at this point, but I'm not sure if I have another good option. So I agree. He takes me to the outskirts of town and has me hide out in this little cave. Then he leaves to try and secure a ride for me. Before I go on, I should tell you about pishtakos so that you can appreciate what exactly is going on here. I'll give a quick summary of my personal knowledge. Pishtako. Folklore being often compared to the Western vampire. But to me they're totally different. Etymologically, the name Pishtako means one who slaughters or someone who cuts people into pieces. Tons of stories about it in Peru. But I'll share a common one. A lone traveler is walking on an empty road at night. The traveler spots someone in the distance approaching him. It's a strange-looking man, well-dressed, with skin as pale as the moon. As this pale man approaches the traveler, he suddenly blows a powder into his face and the traveler goes unconscious. Then, the pale man, the pishtako, extracts the blood and fat from the unconscious traveler's body. Specifically, he does this with the use of specialized instruments, kind of like a surgeon. By the time the traveler wakes up, the pishtako is gone. At first, nothing seems obviously wrong, and the traveler continues on his way. But sometime later, usually a few days, the pishtako's victim collapses. His friends and family are horrified to find that the victim is little more than a bag of bones. His blood and fat have been totally drained from him. So, notice how the pishtako is usually described: white-skinned, well-dressed, and skillful with specialized implements. This has actually put many academics and researchers who are usually white in danger. They're easy targets for pishtako accusations. And occasionally you'll find stories about it in international papers. One famous one that you can Google goes like this. 1980s. World Bank sends gringos into the Andes. Upon seeing the gringos, the villagers immediately begin freaking out. This group of white-skinned, well-dressed men inspire fears about pishtakos coming in to steal our blood and fat and eat our children. The gringos are actually forced to flee under the very real threat of violence. And it's not just being white that puts you in danger. Anyone who uses special tools or technology can find themselves accused of witchcraft. This has happened to many researchers in the field I worked in. With that background explained, let me go back to my own story. I'm in a cave, waiting on Diego. I'm not sure if he's really going to find a ride for me or bring back a mob to kill me. Terrified, I decide to risk going off on my own. I roughly know the way to the city. It will take a while, but it's better than waiting around and possibly dying. So I exit the cave and begin making my way through the woods, looking for the main road, which I'll follow to the city. But then I hear a crowd of people in the distance. The sound of their voices seems to be heading towards me. I freeze. Then I remember something, and I mentally kick myself. I picked the worst time of the year to return to this place. It's November, All Saints' Day, a day when the villagers are out and about in large numbers. Out and about and drunk. Drunk and angry at the gringo who betrayed them years ago. Angry and still reeling from a Pishtaco attack. I couldn't have planned it any worse. To make things worse, when the spirits of the dead come back, they usually make strange demands of their living relatives. As All Saints' Day approaches, families set an extra place at dinner. The dead are said to physically show up and take a seat at the table. The families eat dinner with their dead relatives. They have a little food and something to drink as the spirits tell them, "You owe me such and such offering," or "You owe me such and such favor." And the living have to perform whatever duty the spirit asks of them. This can be intensely stressful for the living relatives. Sometimes the dead only want simple things like little cakes or alcohol left at their graves. But other times they make expensive demands. New gravestones, for instance, things that are financially taxing on their relatives. After the spirits make their demands, they abruptly leave. The family now has 1 year to make the offering, or else, and there are real-world consequences to all of this stuff. Last time I was here, there was a man who had been found hanged outside of town. I assumed it had been a self-end, but I was in constant communication with one of the catechist leaders at the time. I remember him being furious about the event. He told me that the hanged man's wrists had been found bruised and marked. The insinuation was that the other villagers had bound the man's hands, killed him by hanging him, then untied his wrists to make it look like a self-end. I asked why the villagers would do that. The catechist told me it was because the man had failed to make the appropriate offering to his dead father. Failure to do this risks a curse on the entire village. To avoid the curse, the villagers decided to kill the man. The catechist explained that this was like an offering to the dead man, to apologize for his son's failure. You kind of have to wonder why they weren't afraid of incurring a curse from the man they killed. Anyway, I hope you see what I'm getting at. All Saints' Day is more than just a South American Halloween. It can be a time of real psychological stress for the villagers, which many of them deal with by drinking too much. So now here I am on perhaps one of the most dangerous nights of the year. Just a white guy wearing his fancy Western clothing, walking around asking weird questions about a witch hunt, walking around alone. After dark, in the woods, probably near where the young girl was attacked, and I hear the crowd of voices approaching, drunken shouting and singing. But then I think, all of the graves are closer to town, and I'm on the outskirts. Nobody should be coming all the way out here. They're definitely looking for something. What are they going to do if they find me? I decide to hurry onward towards the main road, keeping to the trees, hoping the people are too drunk to really hear or see me. But then I hear, "El Pishtaco," and I see a man near the tree line pointing at me. There are shouts from the crowd. Then it's literally like thunder as dozens of feet start pounding the road behind me. I take off. They give chase. I've never been this scared in my life. I'm running at top speed for I don't know how long, to the point where my lungs burn. My side aches and my throat feels dry. I'm about to vomit. I hear a rumble in the distance and I think it's the crowd. I'm a good runner, but they've kept pace with me. They're approaching quickly. I collapse. I remember thinking, I'm going to be killed out here and nobody will ever know what happened to me. But the low rumbling gets louder and I realize it's a vehicle. I hear Diego's voice and someone picks me up and throws me in the back of a truck. It takes off. Soon the roar of voices fade. I recover from my collapse and see Diego there next to me in the bed of the truck. I thank him for saving my life. Then I pass out from exhaustion. I got back into the city sometime that night. I woke up. Diego was gone. The driver was standing around and I asked him what happened to Diego. He said I was his only passenger and that I owed him my fare. I was confused and kept asking about Diego until I realized Diego had gone out of his way to help me, a possible Pishtaco. Being seen with me probably put his life at risk. He would have to disappear for a while. So he fled and paid the driver not to mention him being there to anybody. Pretty smart. Anyway, the next day I met up with a man that I'll just refer to as a prominent official. I had connections with him through my colleague, the one I came to Peru with. I got in contact with this official because I knew that the Pishtaco hysteria in the village had resulted in an official inquiry. I wanted to check out the documents from the inquiry for myself. The guy told me to come on down and we'd look for the documents together. And we did look for a little bit before the guy told me that the documents must have been misplaced. Then he quickly ushered me out and told me he'd call me if they ever turned up. It was very brusque, and I got the distinct feeling that he was trying to get rid of me. But later he called, said a few files turned up, but most of the inquiry was gone. He wouldn't even offer an explanation, but I decided to take what I could get. So I went to pick up the documents. I found nothing of importance. All of the useful information seemed to be missing. Again, no explanation was given for this mix-up. I did find one item of note though. It was a brief document about one of the men who had been accused of being a pishtako. There was a photo and I recognized Diego's face immediately. His name was printed below his picture, with the word deceased underneath. Obviously, I didn't believe this, but there was an accompanying note about his death. The murderers who had been arrested actually confessed to killing him. They had tied Diego up and stuck a knife through his heart, then thrown him into an empty grave and buried him. The document noted, body never recovered. Probably just a coincidence. That's about it. Now I'm off to mull over my troubles. I feel them weighing down on me again. So long, X.
That place must be scary anon. I haven't seen that in the news though. Maybe the real Pishtaco was one serial killer of many years ago. To be honest, my grandmother heard about it when she was a child, but to still think you would be the Pishtaco because you are white is funny. My grandmother had lands in the countryside during terrorism. She sold most of them because people of villages used to accuse each other of terrorists just for some unrelated minimal fights or arguments, as a way to take revenge, so I kind of understand that it can be chaotic in some places but with a low probability I think. But yeah, I saw some years ago there were people still doing this practice not only here but also in Bolivia, but I do believe is with all of this organs traffic stuff, they have been selling the fat in the black market, for uses in creams mainly. It helps for wrinkles and scars it seems, and before it was said to be used for bells and for planes maintenance.
My grandma used to tell me these stories. Also about condenado and Georgiacha. I know that in the forest part of the country there are another folklore and other beings. I just heard about El Tunch.
OP here. Please share what you know. I always enjoyed listening to people talk about this stuff.
About Pishtaco. Sure. Used to be just a man, as you said, with white skin and brown hair. Well built and tall, using a poncho and also used to live in caves. His modus operandi was attacking people who were traveling alone or just roaming alone, and then they were taken to the caves. That's why when there weren't roads in some countrysides, people used horses and tried to travel in groups to avoid those beings and also robbers. It was said that people who were on the heavy side or women were performed since they have more fat in their bodies. But you were dead after it. There was no other way to extract fat than killing someone. The parts of the body used to be hung with some candles in the ground, so this helped to melt the fat, and the fat was distilled drop by drop, and this was collected in recipients. How did they know that he was in caves? Many stories here. One that after it stopped, someone rested in the cave and found some of that stuff used for him. The candles, the hanging things, and some bones. Others version I read in a book was that traveler who saw a light from a cave and went to look by curiosity and saw what was happening there. My grandmother heard that his crimes were just for some time in this region. So he probably just traveled around, because other regions have similar stories too.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.